Hi, I'm Rachel, and this is my Maybe Midrash 2024 wrap-up video. So the Maybe Midrash was a readathon that was started a few years ago by Jason at Old Blues Chapters and Verse, which happened quietly this year, and it is a readathon that challenges people to read serious works of fiction and nonfiction about religion. And so, in keeping in tandem with my usual interests on this channel, I tend to focus on Judaism. And it is a May readathon for Maybe Midrash, and Midrash is in fact a Jewish form of engaging with biblical texts and reinterpreting and looking at them anew from a different perspective. So, anyway, I wanted to finally get this out before, it gets too far into June here, and just give some brief recap thoughts about the two books I read. And I also went ahead and watched a Jewish film, because that was something that Robert added one year to, the agenda. So the film I watched in English is called All About the Lefkovitches. It is a Hungarian film, and in a lot of ways it's pretty rote when it comes down to it. We're in Budapest, and we have this aging old boxer trainer and his wife, and they're just living a relatively quiet life. There's a little bit of setup about who they are, and the fact that they are, in fact, or at least the father is estranged from his son. The father is Tomas, and the son is named Ivan. And so this is a Jewish family, and Ivan has become religious, unlike his parents, and he has moved to Israel. And now he has a wife and a son of his own, and so we do see Tomas's wife, Zuzia, and she is talking on, video app with her grandson, who's trying to teach her Hebrew. The grandson's name is Ariel. And Zuzia is considering a trip to Israel to visit, her son and his family. And, we see that Tomas is, distant and won't interact really with his son at all. But then, of course, there is a twist, and the twist is that Zuzia dies suddenly and unexpectedly. And Ivan, when he hears about it, decides he wants to come home to mourn his mother. There are some religious customs that people do, and also he does want to try to reconcile with his father. And so he brings his own son to try to do this. His wife has a young baby, and so they stay back in Israel. And it's a kind of classic tale of, an estranged father and son. They're, push and pull about, if they're going to reconcile, if they're going to accept each other's differences and move on. In this case, it really falls far more heavily, I think, on Tomas. Like, he goes out of his way to not make life at all easy for his son, even as his son tries to reach out to him, to talk and to reminisce. He even has one of his boxing students, actually talk to his son in his place. I guess there could be an argument about the fact that Ivan is bringing, religious practice into the home that Tomas might not quite care for. But it's not that intrusive, I think. I mean, the main thing is that every day, for a week after a funeral, people are required to say a prayer service for the deceased. And so what's called a minyan comes into Ivan's home, and he has a funny joke about that, where a Gentile friend asks him, "What's a minyan?" And Tomas says, "Jews in my house." And a minyan is a quorum of adult Jews needed for a public prayer service. But anyway, of course, the icebreaker ultimately is Ariel. Tomas is actually trying, in his way of mourning, to make a cabinet set for in Zuzia's memory, which is something Zuzia admired, this particular cabinet set, before she died. And of course he's doing a lot of that construction amid the prayer service. But Ariel decides to camp out in part of, this cabinet set and is kind of convening with the voice of his grandmother, so he says, his way of mourning her. And Tomas ultimately, urges him out and teaches him how to box, and Ivan is not thrilled about this. There's backstory as well about how Ivan's brother, who is also now dead, was sort of the champion boxer and the favorite son and all of that. And Tomas kind of sees Ivan as weak, and he is this sort of nebbishy, Hasidic man. And the funny thing is, the actor who plays Ivan apparently is like usually this heartthrob in Hungarian films, and he had to put on a little weight and kind of get a little more nebbishy. And I was so surprised. To me, he looked quite, authentically like a Hasidic man who does a lot more, Talmudic study than he would, working out or anything. In terms of the story, it's, heartfelt, but it's also, very predictable and kind of very rote in that way. It's not, moving a lot of new ground in what it says about, a father and son who are estranged, and how they might come together in the face of tragedy, and how, a young grandson might help them along on that because he warms up to Tomas first, basically. I mean, Ivan is trying with his father, but, Ariel's actually the one who's able to, forge a relationship. And props to the little boy Ariel. The actor really did very well holding his own, I think, against these older actors. But to me, I think the most interesting thing about the experience was that I watched this movie for a local Jewish film festival. And, for those sorts of things, sometimes, apparently, we might get to fly the director in to talk about the film, which apparently has been doing very well in Hungary, and now is, making the rounds in North America, usually, in Jewish institutions. And so the director of the film, and then also the JCC director in Budapest, they were both there. And they talked a little about the film and about Jewish life in Hungary now. And that's, I think, some of that intrigued me more, that, even the reason why they decided to bring religion into the film is they were saying in Hungary most Jewish films are only about the Holocaust. And it's only now, I guess with some distance from their communist past, that younger generations of Hungarian Jews are embracing more religion and more religious expression, and that's sort of a difference from the older generations. And they themselves had to, do a fair bit of research about, Orthodox customs, but it's something that's, a little more open, I guess, in that society now. So I thought that was intriguing, that perspective, and there's always something a little homey about, far-flung Jewish communities reaching out. I have a bias, that the vast majority of the Jewish community now lives either in Israel and in North America, especially America. The pockets around the rest of the world are much smaller. In Hungary, of course, the vast majority of the country was wiped out by the Holocaust, which gives a strange feeling to looking at, Jews alive today who came from such a small, remainder of the populace, and the fact, that they are becoming more interested in Judaism, that they have a JCC. After they talked with the group, actually a couple was going to Budapest over the summer, and the JCC director and them were exchanging WhatsApp information, so that he could, show them around Jewish sites. And so it's just an intimacy, because Jews in general are such a small community. And, a lot of the diaspora communities, especially the ones outside of North America, especially, US and Canada, they're so much smaller, and it's just nice to reconnect, as it were, in today's day and age. But moving on to my reading portion and the fiction and nonfiction I read this year, which are both from the same author, incidentally. They're both from American author Jonathan Rosen. I'd read another of his books for the BookTube Prize earlier this year, and it, took me down a rabbit hole, I guess. And so Jonathan Rosen is himself, he has a history of writing for Jewish publications, and he's married to a rabbi, and he wrote both of these books pretty close together in the early 2000s. And anyway, I'm going to start with his nonfiction. This is a slight book of essays called The Talmud and the Internet, A Journey Between Worlds. And the impetus for this book of essays is that his maternal grandmother died of natural causes, and he was grappling with her death, and also, like in a more existential way, grappling with his own identity as seen through the lens of his grandmother's. His maternal grandmother, who lived in safety and died, of old age, as it were, in the U.S., versus his paternal grandmother, who was murdered in the Holocaust, and his father, Rosen's father, survived by getting on the Kindertransport in the 1930s. And so there's this push and pull between safety and trauma and what that narrative means. And in part, that's what brings him to the idea of the Talmud, or more broadly, the idea of Rabbinic Judaism, which is the Judaism we practice today, because that was able to survive the diaspora of 2,000 years ago when the Romans destroyed Jerusalem. And there's a major component of how that happened, a figure that he, in these essays, he actually, he talks about the Talmud, but I think more specifically, he doesn't, bring up, specific parts of the Talmud as much as he does figureheads that existed around the Talmud, and one of them would be Yochanan ben Zakkai, who is credited basically for saving Judaism when Jerusalem was destroyed, because Judaism was a temple religion. The sects at the time, a lot of them, or at least a couple of them, were very tied to the temple. The Zealots didn't even want anyone to leave Jerusalem. They wanted, the Jews to be martyred there. But their survivors, brought texts out with them and basically started transcribing what they called the oral law, which is part of the Talmud, and then extrapolating from that and moving forward into rabbinic commentaries and turning Judaism into a religion of the book, and a religion that, focuses around reading and interpreting the Torah and other texts rather than convening at the temple. And so that's how we survived. And he does compare that a bit to the internet, because the Talmud is a sprawling text. It was really written over 1,000 years in 2 locations, with rabbis, convening in study sessions and speaking with other rabbis who are long dead in this really ornate conversation and debate with one another about various aspects of life. He talks about the internet as something that is also so sprawling and can be kind of overwhelming, but that maybe it can bring meaning in a way that it connects people in new ways across the world, and there's just, the point is to find some form of meaning in it. I feel like this is kind of his way to make all of these hyper-Jewish topics relatable to the Gentile audience. And also, I guess he is, ruminating on some just changes in reality and what the internet has done, for public knowledge and public discourse, which 2,000 years ago or to 1,000 years ago, that's what the Talmud did for Jewish understanding after they had been dispersed from their homeland. He also talks about other writers, and here he's, also, heavily entrenched in, Western literary culture. He talks about Josephus, who was famously the Jew who betrayed his own people during, the fight against Rome. But because of him, there's a first-person account of the loss of Jerusalem and of Judea more broadly. I feel like when I was reading this, it's short, and if you're already entrenched in, these sort of Jewish history and culture, you'd probably get more out of this than not. Stepping away from it, it's, sort of harder to sort of thread the pieces together. And, if you don't have these sort of narrow interests, it might not be as intriguing, but for me, it certainly did the trick. I would put more eggs in the basket of Rosen's fiction novel, which is Joy Comes in the Morning. I feel like, even though it also has some pretty heavy Jewish themes, the fictional aspect, the narrative aspect of it all, it's just a lot more cohesive, so that anybody hopefully would be able to, get into it and understand it in some way. That's what fiction does, with that sense of narrative interiority of characters. So anyway, it's also, I should say, somewhat autobiographical and interesting to read after reading the memoir he wrote, which we judged for the BookTube Prize. But Joy Comes in the Morning follows a Reform rabbi called Deborah Green, and I was very excited to read about a Reform rabbi in literature, because it's the progressive religious practice that I've been wanting to read more about, because I feel like in so much of, Jewish literature, we're either following the ultra-Orthodox, or it's basically, some form of Seinfeld, as it were, and it's about that particular niche of Jewish culture in a way, which is pretty assimilated. And I guess one could argue Reform is somewhat assimilated, but it's certainly religious as well. But to get to the point, this is a narrative, I promise. Deborah is part of what she does. She's an assistant rabbi at a congregation, so she helps the clergy team there, lead Shabbat and other services. But on her own, she also goes to the local hospital to, conduct chaplaincy visits, sometimes with members of her community, and sometimes with whoever needs it, especially if they're Jewish. And one of the people who needs it is a man called Henry Friedman, who he actually attempted suicide after a stroke, because he didn't want to keep going on after that, but the suicide attempt caused a second stroke, and he survived, but he's in the hospital. And when Deborah's there, she, of course, runs into his family, including his adult son, Lev. And Lev is a man who is kind of at loose ends. He recently ran from commitment by way of running from his bride at the altar, which, fun times. And since then, his family's kind of been tiptoeing around him, so he's the last one to know what happened fully. But he and Deborah strike up a relationship around the time of Deborah visiting. I think he also sees her like in a nursing home when his father moves to the nursing home, and is able to sort of see through the rabbinical mask to the person underneath, which is something Deborah also has been desiring, because although she is a very religious person, and she has like a strong faith in God and in community, she also is a person who is struggling more with, wanting a romantic relationship of her own, and not just to say only counsel, couples before their weddings. Another thing she has to do, as a rabbi. And so they do start a relationship. It is very influenced by the fact that she has a busy professional life. Like at one point they were going to go to a baseball game, and they had to go late because Deborah had to conduct a sudden funeral. And so Lev is learning more about Judaism as well. He is Jewish. His father is a Holocaust survivor, and in fact has become more religious himself in later years. And he had left a cryptic note for Lev, the suicide note. And it was about Lev trying to, find his footing and his place, and Lev interpreted as, maybe learning more about Judaism, especially since Henry did want the Kaddish said over him when he died. That's the service that we say after people die, especially for the week after, and then, every year. And so he does, meet with Deborah, learns more about, studying the Talmud and other aspects of Jewish life. They talk a bit about how Judaism can bring comfort, and stability, in terms of sense of crisis. But I personally really love what they say about the Talmud. Again, the Talmud comes up because this is like a quintessential Jewish text. It's like our way of surviving in the rabbinic Judaism age. And, there's a quote that Deborah says about, the debates and the arguments and sort of the unwieldiness of the Talmud is kind of the point, and like you get a broader sense of the rabbis trying to come to terms with like what human behavior is, and it's just the messiness and the flaws and the complexity are kind of the point of it. And I feel like that's something that is somewhat quintessentially Jewish when it comes to the Talmud. And it's also just, really fun to see other aspects of Jewish life in here. And it's fun that Deborah herself is a real character. She's not a caricature. And the major conflict of the novel is a crisis of faith she has when visiting a particular congregant. And it the congregant's experience eats into her own faith a bit. And so we get to hear about Deborah's experience, about what brought her to Judaism. She didn't grow up religious, but her father's death was a stepping stone into becoming more religious because she was looking for that purpose. And we talk a bit about Reform Judaism, and it's a similarity to the movie because, in fact, Reform Judaism is the largest denomination of Judaism in diaspora, and especially in America, and it was known for being very sort of anti-religious, almost sort of divorced from practice. But in later years, I think rabbis of Deborah's generation were coming back to a religious practice and reclaiming more of it. But anyway, so Deborah deals with that crisis. She does sort of move away from Lev a bit during that time. Lev is also, trying to deal with connecting to his father after this tragedy, and he also does have a friend who had a psychotic break and has schizophrenia. And there's I think maybe my least favorite part of this book, I don't know, is sort of a climactic subplot with the friend that just seems weird to read after, the memoir that talks about this friend's inspiration, and it almost feels like this book was using a random sort of subplot. It felt random to me as a sort of course correction for this friend. And there is so much in this book, Lev is similar to Rosen, and maybe perhaps Deborah is similar to his wife, who is a Reform rabbi. I mean, I guess I'm hoping, in a way, Deborah became such a full, complex character in this book that I kind of hope, she's her own character and not just purely the wife plagiarized. I don't know, I really fell for Deborah. I guess Deborah did really what I wanted, which was to explore Jewish religion through a progressive lens, and I think a character whose narrative and the story, the romance with Lev, the ins and outs of her life and her religious questioning, I think it's told in such a way that can be relatable to a larger reading audience. So yeah, I really appreciated this book. And that about covers it for me now. I'm going to leave my book reviews and a review of the movie linked all down below. And I'm finally ready to get into my June reading. I have been doing some new reading this month. Hope to do a bit more later, but for now, the next time you should see me on this channel should be my first Am Reading video where I get into those books, so stay tuned for that. And I want to thank Jason for, bringing the inspiration for this readathon. It's something I've been enjoying doing for the last few years and hopefully for longer. If anyone stumbles upon this video who took part in maybe Midrash this year, I'd love to hear how your reading went. And in the meantime, thanks so much for watching, everyone, and I'll see you next time.